How's it going, everybody? I'm Seth Martin, and today we have Jon Gillespie-Brown back with us. He's the founder and CEO of Nalpeiron, a successful SaaS company for over 20 years now. Thank you, Jon, for joining us today.
Good to see you.
Today's topic for discussion is going to be all about pricing and monetization shifts, specifically the latest shift towards what many people are calling usage-based pricing. Jon, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this shift and what your initial perspective is on it.
Yeah, I think there's a big driver from the AI that people are starting to consume now. So end users, I think, are starting to see a different way of consuming software. And I think the two fairly new ideas, they're not new to us, we're in a monetization business, but new for the market, are usage consumption or kind of similar kinds of utility-based pay-as-I-go billing and outcome-based billing. Now, these are complex things and probably only having a short discussion about it here, but in essence, the hardest thing to implement is outcome-based charging, essentially. There are a number of players in the marketplace experimenting with it, but it is quite a dangerous methodology to use. And my analogy will be the long time it took to switch to subscription-based from perpetual licensing because it impacts people's cash flow and the way that they run their business. So, for example, the difficulty in switching from perpetual to subscription was if you had your business, you expected to get big lumps of cash in all the time, and then you had to spread that cash over many months. It meant that you had to kind of set up your business to be able to do that from a cash flow perspective and many other elements you had to change. I think that same analogy applies here, where you've got a subscription business set up and now you suddenly have to change. And if you do outcome-based billing, for example, it's very, very unclear where your revenue is coming from, how much it will be, and when it will arrive, if at all, right? So it's a big mindset shift. Usage-based billing, a little less so, but still hard to be able to predict what's my revenue going to be. And the ability to predict and plan your cash flows and revenue are critical to SaaS businesses. So, firstly, you got the philosophical question of, well, right now I understand how to run my business. I know how many subscriptions I got. They tend to be fairly fixed in nature. And then I'm adding a massive variability by adding usage-based billing or switching to usage-based billing from subscription, right? Now, if you've got a very large cash balance, not such of a problem to experiment with, but the average SaaS company isn't in that position. And so from an operational standpoint, we've got quite a few questions. Now, my point, I suppose, is I imagine if you're a brand new AI startup, no problem. You've thought about this, you've got venture capital funding, you've thought through the cash flow implications, you're going to experiment, and hopefully you've thought this through sufficiently that it actually makes sense for you to do. Of course, if you're an enormous company already with many billions of ARR, not a problem. But the majority of AI startups will be much smaller, and so they'll have to think that through. My prediction is the majority of folks, just like us, by the way, will end up with some kind of hybrid approach. So I don't think there's any avoiding doing some kind of usage-based component to one's charging over time. Don't get me wrong, some industries probably don't have to do it, but I think in the mainstream, the customer, the end user, will start to demand this way of paying. And I think the future will be some kind of step-by-step process moving towards that, just the same as it was from perpetual to subscription. And I think I'll give us as an example. We have kind of a traditional model where we have different editions, different price points for different numbers of seats, different feature sets, and we have an enterprise version. And they have kind of a step change in price depending on capabilities and the number of different things that are available. And now we've added AI to our products. We now have this big variable, which is totally different to those things. And that variable relates to, the amount of queries, if you want to keep a simple language, that our customers do against the AI capabilities that we provide. And we're adding more and more and more of those. And that's where the complexity comes. I've got, for example, a customer may pay us monthly on a fixed amount. And then on top of that, I'm now going to have to bill them for the usage component, which will be variable, right? So I don't know what that's going to be. It'll probably change consistently over time. So over time, I may be able to predict. In the short term, I need a way of rebilling any of those costs based on usage. So I'm going to end up with what we call a hybrid model, where I've got seats and features in a standard kind of subscription model. And then on top of that, I'm going to have to layer in an additional fee to the client based on their consumption of certain functionality, whatever that may be. And so I imagine the majority of us will end up with that 3D chess where we've got quite a few different methods for monetizing. And again, I guess we're lucky in the sense that we do this for a living. So in our own platform, we have the capability of doing all of those different pieces of the puzzle and ending up with a conclusion that we can bill the customer for. But I imagine many people in the industry are not prepared for this and will have to consider how they built their billing. And unfortunately, most SaaS companies hard code their business model rather than using somebody like Nalpeiron to help them monetize. But I imagine many of them will wake up and start to say, well, it'd be much easier to have a piece of middleware. Don't use my engineering team for all of this. I'm going to use some middleware and let them handle all of the pain that goes with the consistent changes. And by the way, if I have to change it next week, what do I do? Or the week after, because I have to remain competitive. And the landscape is moving a lot right now. Again, if it's on a monetization platform, very fast and quick to make modifications to the pricing and packaging. If it's in my hard-coded business model, I'm going to have to keep going back around with engineering and QA and releasing that way, which is many, many months for most people. And months could be the difference between winning and losing business, and none of us can afford to wait that long to get the job done. So I hope that's a quick explanation of how we're handling it and the kind of complexity of dealing with these changes which are being driven by the market.
Definitely, definitely. And I think it's important to point out that you are in the monetization business. You've seen shifts like this in the past, specifically the shift from perpetual to a subscription based. I'm just curious, how aggressive do you think this shift from subscription to usage based is going to be in comparison to that shift from perpetual to subscription based? Are they
Way, way,
comparable?
way faster. I mean, life is always accelerating, right? So we had perpetual for a very, very long time. And then subscription came along. And it did take quite a while for the switch, but as I say, mostly because mature businesses couldn't handle the massive swing in cash flows. But they love the benefit of a consistent long-term, long-tail business opportunity. But as I say, we were talking about it a hell of a lot, and then it took a whole, 10 years for people to actually implement it. My guess is it'll be 10 months, not 10 years, that we have to implement this. The whole market is moving much more quickly now. And I think the consumer, whether they be a business or an end user, is much more discerning, many more choices, there's a lot more competition. And so those people that are shifting much faster and more effectively are the ones that will end up winning because, if you've got 10 choices and the favored choice has this usage-based component in it, they're going to start taking all the business. Why pick an old-fashioned model when you can have a more flexible one, which, in theory, for the consumer will save them money, right? They only pay for what they consume. They feel more comfortable about that. It feels fairer, right, from a billing perspective. And I think it's kind of a competitive advantage. So, as the CEO, I feel like we have to move on this quickly ourselves, and I believe this will also be the case for many of our customers and those that join us when they realize that hard coding is not the way to go and they'd rather use a monetization platform to handle this kind of problem.
I'm also curious how you think that usage-based pricing is going to affect how companies build and even more so sell their products, and how it's going to specifically affect that. What's your opinion?
Well, like I've said, I think if you've got a brand new clean slate and you have the kind of product, so AI is a good example, it kind of lends itself to this kind of model quite well. I think if you're building a product in that space or building an AI model or you're building an AI plus your existing software kind of model and you're starting from ground zero, things are a lot easier for you to look at a usage-based product, right? From the perspective of uh, a mature product, I think that's going to be a lot different. I think they are going to have to incorporate a hybrid model and move over time, test and see what happens.